Yeah. So basically, you started this company. You're not scientists. You're businessmen, and your
That's
basic
right.
is to try and overcome the business barriers to marketing biochar made from kelp. And you're working with a Dutch. You've worked with a Dutch scientist so far to on the actual rolling out.
Close. So yeah, so we're all about lots of different practical ways to solve man-made climate change,
Yeah.
of which biochar and the soil improver, soil stimulant would be one of the products that we're creating. We're also creating technically an alternative digital currency or solution. So we've got this thing called ocean carer bonds there. Then it's not a currency, it's an investment in nature to help our farms. We believe that clearly the idea of the photosynthesis of kelp and the growth rate, etc., is rapid and extracts CO2.
Yeah.
If we can find a way to measure and monitor that and then harvest it in a low carbon intensive way, well, then that is in effect net positive, right? Which is
Yeah.
great for us. And we wanted to test out a hypothesis of whether people were prepared to invest in us, the regenerative power of nature, and if we could do that in a sustainable way, whether people would be interested in paying for that. And we did a little test of this, sort of from. It was meant to be a Christmas present. It was meant to be a Christmas idea of gift, and we finally managed to get it going live on the 27th of December, which is really annoying because I wanted to do it on the 1st of December. But anyway, we got it there, and we sold out in 24 days. We sold out of just a test of them. 50 or we actually sold 53 because some people were double buying more than multiple units, and it was ridiculous. We said we'd rebalance a quarter of a ton of CO2 for £100. Bearing in mind you can buy a ton of carbon offset for 30 or 40 pounds now, a ton, and I'm selling a quarter of a ton for £100 just as it's kelp derived.
Yeah.
Just to see if there was a market for it, which there were, and people are coming back to us saying they like the idea of it. It's something that's an alternative to trees. It's fast, like the fact that we're doing something different, and we're doing something that's amazing for the environment.
I think there's one thing that's really, really impressive about the kelp side of things is that you don't run into the land use issue, which we do with forests, we do with all renewables, basically. And there's just so many co-benefits, aren't there, from growing kelp. Like I was talking to, there's a benthic ecologist who's part of the collective. She works for CFAS, and she was saying that, until about 100 years, 150 years ago, there was our coastal littoral zone was just filled with seagrass. And it just disappeared because of, the pollution that we pumped into the rivers and stuff at that point, even before we'd really started having much of an effect on climate change. So it wasn't an ocean acidification thing. It was just, a coastal pollution issue, apparently. So it all died off. But obviously, if we start having more kelp growing, then that's like nurseries to the fisheries industry as well. And certainly the idea is that that's
our goal.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, because then you also got like, there's not really, I can't remember the name of the company is, but they're producing this kind of green sand, and that helps reduce the acidity of the oceans kind of in a local area. So there's actually a beach that's naturally occurs like this in Hawaii somewhere, but it's a really big tourist attraction. But their idea is something that's really scalable, because the industry can produce it really quickly. I'm not sure where it comes from. I'd have to listen to the podcast again. But basically, it's scalable, and obviously you can transport it around very easily. And it's already being transported for some other industrial use. But all you would have to do is empty it onto beaches. That's really cool. And it lowers that. Well, doesn't lower the pH. It raises the pH so that it's better for calcareous kind of marine organisms. So they can, at the bottom of the food chain, they can grow, and everything else can start to feed off that more more productively or more ably. So who was the because just thinking about, there's loads and loads of co-benefits, aren't there? There's biodiversity, there's ocean acidification, for which this idea and the one with the types of sand, whose name I've forgotten, is the only real solutions. And it's almost like, for many years, there's not really been any attention on ocean acidification as something that we actually are able to tackle, or we should try and tackle. Is that something that you guys
it's
think about when you're
yeah,
when you were thinking about this project?
massively. So the things, there were a number of moments that were like, this is just my brain, like, I can't understand why this isn't happening. And just the piece that says that our oceans are fantastic carbon stores, but as temperatures rises, they become less effective.
Mm.
So now you've got less ability to have CO2 in the oceans, and the oceans are essentially choked of marine life because there's so much. And it's going to be in our atmospheres if we don't do something about how the volumes that are stored in. So clearly, we've got there's a number of stages we go to, right? So we're talking about the biochar as like this is an early test. Some of the next stuff that we want to be able to do is then scale this up to have to being an agricultural type solution. Now, I know it's going to be very local to start off with, but that's if you can get high quality nutrients into soil, that's going to only improve our quality of life. So that's the next big thing for 2022. That's what we're doing. We're building up this brand in 2021, creating products and services that practically help people in real world situations. We then expand that into some sort of agricultural space. And then some of the other big triggers is that we're looking at I've got to get it right. Hang on. Dual level, stormproof, offshore modular kelp farms.
There we go. That's exactly what
yeah.
That's exactly what Holly Jean Buck, she interviewed someone with regards to that in her book as well. So are these ones that have kind of ballast tanks on them and they lower themselves below storm weather?
Not
or
quite. So I've managed to get a guy who's sort of an engineer and also doctor in thermodynamics and thermodynamics, and he's created this special interconnected modular design that it doesn't matter how, we've got to test it out clearly, but in theory it doesn't matter what you throw at it, it's not going to move very much.
Okay.
It's really clever. And it sits in a specific way and it doesn't damage the ecosystem, which is amazing. So there's this idea of creating these marine garden cities, in effect, like a Stevenage or a Peterborough or a Milton Keynes out in the ocean for fish, because as you say, where kelp grows, marine life flourishes. It's just the way it is. If you create food, animals will join that, and you literally will create life there that didn't exist before. There'll be schools of fish that will sort of live in different locations. And although I have a concern about damaging some marine ecosystems and introducing new ecosystems into areas that wouldn't traditionally have it there, I think that there is a calculated risk that says that for the distance that we're talking about and what we're trying to grow, actually it's not going to hurt anyone. It's only going to support. It's not like we're trying to test out whether this nuclear energy is going to damage the sea, whether a naturally occurring element can be, I don't think that was ever a question when we started to think about farming. Crops and grains, will that damage our ecology?
That's an interesting point. I mean, I suppose that's one of the things now. It's like we're pretty much trying to reinvent the entire agricultural system because because of the damage it does do to the environment. And if it's done badly, and obviously reinventing it is a way of making it so that it helps. Well, it helps the environment to an extent. But I mean, there's loads of different ways, ranging from permaculture to regenerative agriculture. But I think permaculture is one of the ones which is a bit more left field and would take a much larger adjustment than regenerative agriculture would. But you can certainly feel like your company or your product of just at this point biochar can really feed into that. It's an interesting. I think it's just one of those things I've been thinking about, just doing an infographic on my own of some kind, just to show the kind of interlinked nature of producing a product in the oceans, talking about the co-benefits you get with ocean acidity, fish nurseries,
When
And
you produce
even
that, by the way, please send that to me. That sounds like gold. That's
I
absolutely gold.
don't know how good it will
Also,
look.
if you, I don't know if you also, if you happen to have something that sort of covers what the just the payback to from seaweed to trees, something that can visually represent those paybacks is also, high quality information. We've got we've got some bits and pieces, but we don't all have all of the information that required to be able to accurately say it. And that's something we search for. We actually search for, really, because I don't want to put out any information that I can't give some quantifiable piece to. So when people ask me how much good are you doing, I'm saying I will let you know. Once I've got some measurements in place for the actions that I'm taking. Right now, I'm telling ideas, and people are loving ideas, and that inspires. So that's what we're trying to do. That's part of this piece is positioning something of good. It's all very well good. So it's saying I'm trying to do good, but if no one's hearing you, then you might as well shout in a dark room in a corner. But building that brand identity and building that trust between people who hadn't got involved in this conversation, which is also something that's really interesting. So when I've been positioning ourselves on LinkedIn, I know that I'm getting people involved in the conversation that weren't involved in the conversation when you put up evocative images and memes that give people some really interesting insights. They're coming to you and saying, is it really that bad? No, I don't think you can be right with these figures. Where does that, and how does NASA sit on that? Or I heard this piece of information. And we have this almost like this portfolio of responses and ripostes about how we're actually dealing with it, and the interchange and interplay. And sometimes we do get it wrong, and I'll hold my hands up. But it's such an emotive subject as well, trying to, and the nature of our politics, global politics, for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years has caused this divisive nature. So people are being a little bit less accepting and understanding of other people's views, and trying to sit in that space where you have to almost police and coach and just educate people outside of the conversation, which is what we're getting, which is again another big indicator that we're succeeding. If you're getting people who are that weren't involved in that conversation, that's success already.
Yeah, I mean, I did a talk about broadly about this, and the role of marine macroalgae and stuff on the climate. About a year ago now, as part of the CFCA, we did these. I was like I've been given the role of education lead, and I was, I thought I'd do a teaching myself, and it was something I was interested in. So I mean, I could send that to you if you like. It's full of loads and loads of references and stuff. But yeah, one of the key things that came up, and every time I mention this, people do ask the question about what about the impacts on the environment, and I did ask that quite a question very, very, very quickly to, my kind of CFCA colleague, who's the marine benthic ecologist, and she was mentioning that, if you do it on the coastal ecosystems, then if you bring something back in that was already there, then the rule of thumb is that it should be okay. But if you bring in something different, then then you can cause problems. We've obviously got this issue with the warming of the oceans and the poleward movement of marine organisms, because they're obviously hot air is easier to cool yourself down against rather than hot water. So obviously it transfers heat to the body much more quickly than air does. So like marine organisms are they're moving poleward very quickly, aren't they? And I know that coastal ecosystems are slightly different to kind of pelagic ones, because you can get loads of microclimates everywhere, and you know organisms and ecosystems are affected differently at different rates. And but at the same time, it's like there is going to be these impacts anyway. And is it better? I think there's going to be a lot of difficult decisions to be made with regards to, do we try and do, are we going to go for one of the best of the worst of the best solutions, I suppose, or the best of the worst solutions? Like everything's going to have an impact, isn't it? Because we're going to be even the idea of even the idea of putting solar farms all over the desert is, there is still some biodiversity there which will be impacted, and it can also raise the temperatures locally, because you just have loads of dark solar cells concentrating heat there, or soaking it up and re-radiating it in the local ecosystem. But yeah, with regards to this, it's like that's the big one, like the biodiversity impact. Are we willing to take the risk on what will happen? I mean, we don't even know. Well, one thing we can be certain of is a lot of the biodiversity that we see in our oceans, in the locales that they are in, that's going to change over the next few years, as it's already changing now. So I suppose we should, that should be something that's factored in, isn't it, really? But
it is. You have to. So my not as challenge, my concern about the rate of decline of species on our planet, which is significant. We've lost in the region of 80-90% of the natural species in the last 200 years. Right. If you it's really interesting. I was just reading Noah Yuval Harari's book,
okay.
Sapiens. I just happened to, I love this. I love that book, right? And where he's talking about, humans were just another insignificant animal on the planet up until we discovered fire, and then we actually had an advantage over the rest of our animal population because of the size of our brains and the way that we did things. But even for millions of years, we didn't get to the top of the food chain. It just happened rapidly. And what we didn't study in understanding our dominance as a species on this planet was what we were changing. That wasn't anything that came to our thinking as a species. We were just expanding, just wildly. And now what we're saying is, okay, to save dwindling species, we wait until the science is 100% correct to tell us that it's okay. But in that time, to get from where we are, 80% to 100%, we could lose all of our biodiversity.
Yeah, it is a huge. We are at this point where there seems to be a real disconnect, and I struggle with this myself. Is there seems to be a real disconnect of people really understanding where we are, and also just because of the kind of the lag in the response of the climate system, there's people look at where we are right now and they think about where temperatures are right now, but they're not really thinking about actually, even if we stopped now, the impacts will continue, or a lot of them will continue, just because of the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and the effects that that's going to have in the intervening years between now and whatever day they stop having their impacts. And I think that's part of it, that people miss the whole picture of actually where we are right now, and just how things will continue to decline for quite some time. And then when you start moving that, if you start combining that with what those impacts would mean for global society, and how that will potentially reduce our ability to respond to these issues, because we will have less trust in the financial system, because there'll be less work being done, there'll be less businesses growing, paying money back. There was really interesting. I was speaking at an engineering forum in Bristol about a year ago, talking about climate change, and one of the academics was a geographer who was studying flood and coastal risk management, and she was saying actually economists so far have added negative discount rates to our future prospects of being able to do something. So it should be easier in the future because we'll be wealthier, we'll be more efficient at doing what we're doing now. So it should be easier and cheaper. So, we push the burden onto future generations, thinking that it's going to be easier for them. And she was saying, actually, they're thinking more now about adding positive discount rates, or whichever way it is round. I think negative discount rates should be, to make it so that actually the opposite will be true. And, to make hay while the sun's shining now, albeit, starting to dim a little bit, proverbially. But we're in the situation where we should be acting as fast as we can now to position ourselves correctly, or as well as we can.
Exactly, this is what we're trying to do. That's exactly that seat.
Have you thought about? It seems like you thought about the biochar side of things. Is that the first avenue you've come to think of?
So the ocean, the rebalance, the ocean carbon extraction and rebalance carbon was the first, and then the biochar is the second. Then then the ultimate goal is to create a sustainable impact on the animal feed and human and food consumption market. To be able to scale up, I mean, to be able to scale up our offshore kelp farms, to be able to create enough biomass of the right sort of bromine full, or it's bromine, isn't it? It is bromine. The one that helps reduce methane.
Oh, I don't actually know, but yeah, there are
I
definitely
think
ones.
I think it's bromine. I've had a day of sciencey stuff, and I can't remember all my facts. But anyway, so there's a particular type of a number of species of seaweed and kelp,
It is the brown
which
seaweeds, isn't it? Or something, the red,
there
ruddy
is
brown ones.
red seaweed,
There
yeah.
we go.
So yeah, and we're looking at trying to create that in volume. Now, whether we can do that offshore on the kelp farms is one thing, but we definitely can grow that from the right sort of region. So in Australia, in the Philippines, in etc., they can grow this asparagus type seaweed, red seaweed. And what we intend to be able to do is then grow that and have that as an organic supplement into cattle feed.
Mhm.
Now, if the insight tells us that this type of seaweed reduces methane by up to 90%. Methane is a more dangerous greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I've heard they
And it's
already use it in
25%. It's 25% of global greenhouse gases comes from the production of feed of cattle. So if you're taking away, so lowering the amount of soya and corn that the animal is having to eat, which is processed petrochemical animal feed. So that's a lower carb. So they're not eating that. They're eating more organic food, which is nutrient rich and actually stops their guts from having, microbacteria that produces methane. In effect, it's kind of like an antacid for the cows. It makes they like it, and so they're doing that, and they're producing up to 90% less methane gas. That's going to buy us a bit more time. So that's on the event horizon that we've got to get to again as quickly as possible. How do we scale that? We've got some understanding on how we can globalize things, but let's one thing at a time. We've got to get to a number of hurdles first before we can start to talk about how we actually can be able to do that. But there's science routes, there's innovation routes, there's lots of things. We're trying to create as many opportunities to give for people to engage with what we're doing as possible. So we want to engage with the farming communities. We want to engage with the aquaculture communities. Currently in conversation with Barbados and the Seychelles about doing things for them, because they have lots of particular issues, and we want to work with countries that are right at the edge of climate change to create. And we've got on our radar is for these offshore kelp farms, we've got these fish catcher systems, which we're actually trying to implement, which essentially allows the big fish to be able to be caught and the smaller fish to just swim away. It's just beautiful. We can do that sustainably. We can do it sustainably with no nets, with zero nets.
Oh, I see.
Wouldn't that just be amazing?
So you're catching fish without the need for nets, catching them by size with no need for nets.
Yeah. So what we would do essentially is you would have this. We wouldn't. Don't get me wrong. We're not going to get loads and loads and loads of fish, but we will be able to sustainably catch and put these catchers underneath our kelp farms, and it will have holes in it.
Okay.
And then the fish will just sort of like swim. The little fish will swim away.
And kind of like lobster pots almost. It's like the large ones go in, but it's hard for them to get out, and the small ones can get out very easily.
Yeah.
Okay. That's really interesting.
That's a little bit further down the line as well. Yeah. Because then what you're doing is you're creating the marine habitat that they come to. It's going to be abhorrent conditioning for fish once we start to know that the food exists in this same location. It may eventually get harder and harder for us to catch the fish if they actually learn, but let's take one thing at a time. There's lots of things on this roadmap to success to be able to do these things sustainably. It just requires some lateral thinking.
Yeah.
We're talking about, we're saying if we put these kelp farms out in the ocean, well, why aren't we catching the plastic at the same time? Why don't we just put one of those, a few of those plastic? We're there.
Well,
Let's do it.
that's actually one of the ideas that that I've read about as well. Was if you do it with sargasso seaweed, you could have a completely industrialized. There's I think it's a Belgian engineer who published a paper in 2012 called Nert, I think his surname is. I don't know how you would really spell it. I mean, how you'd say it. But I'll send that to you as well. It's really interesting. But he was talking about how you basically, you seed the ocean currents, the ocean gyres that have the garbage patches in them, the plastic garbage patches, and you seed those with the sargasso, biomass, and you put some fertilizer in there as well of some kind, maybe just ground up like seaweed from like your previous harvest or whatever, and then the ocean gyres, they just basically do half of the harvesting work for you, and you have these massive structures in the ocean with booms on them, and it just floats into them, and you kind of gather it up. But at the same time, as long as you're positioned in the right place, the seaweed comes to you, and also the plastics come to you. So you have a feedstock for so the feedstock for the you've got the sargasso seaweed coming in, and also it's going to have plastic flotsam inside it as well, so you can separate out the two. And I mean, his thing was really heavily skewed towards getting us back down to 280 ppm by mid-century or 2070 by using it as biofuel. So obviously the plastics can be used as biofuel. Well, plastics can be used as recycled fossil fuel effectively, but zero carbon, as it were.
And we're going to need more and more of these left field ideas, and think about how we can actually make them real as our clock ticks, right? So those sorts of splitting those and creating those biofuels, etc., from the sargassum, etc., is it seems like a crazy wild idea, but in a few years' time, if we don't solve anything, it's like, well, that's an option that's on the table.
Yeah, that's a really good point. A lot of these options are going to become a lot more favorable, aren't they, once we start to really realize how unsustainable or just how undoable or damaging the current systems that we have are. I noticed on LinkedIn there's a chap who, I can't remember his name is. I'm connected with him in some way on there, as we're connected to loads of people. But he used to work in the wind farm industry, and now he's fighting against it because he feels that it's a really bad idea in terms of the damage it does to terrestrial ecosystems and how it prevents them being managed in a better way. And obviously it's really bad for birds and bats. But as we learn more about these solutions and we roll them out at scales that we haven't done so far, then we will start to see different impacts from them, I think. But have you thought about the biofuels route? Is that something that you think about at all?
It's a little, so there's, depending on how we're going to be processing our kelp or our seaweed, one of the things that we realize is that during our low carbon intensive processing, we will be producing some gas that we'll be able to put into the national grid, and the gas supplies, etc. So we will be producing that, and we'll try to use the heat that we generate in part of our processing for more sustainable benefits as well. But biogas is on the event horizon. Whether it's the right thing for us to do, it's very difficult. I can't quite say whether it is just yet, because I don't have enough insight. I don't have even close to my 50. I don't even have close to 50%, let alone 80%. I can make some good decisions on 75, 80% of knowledge, and I can hold my head up and say, you know what, I was doing what I was taught from business, that I've got most of the information, and if I need to pivot back and change something, I can do. But on biofuels right now, the cost benefit, the jury's out for me. I don't know enough.
Yeah, there's definitely that side of it, which is we're still producing CO2 whenever we burn it, and that's obviously a problem, isn't it?
It is.
And I know that whenever, in terms of the reception certain types of solutions get, anything which is reclaiming or recycling anything and then producing another fossil fuel effectively, but not one that we're digging up out of the ground. So it's not kind of virgin fossil fuel, as it were. It's kind of reclaimed. It still gets that kind of size and lukewarm reception of, well, that's not really. People start to lean more towards looking at true renewable technologies like solar and wind, and which I think they should be a big part of the mix. But I think obviously we need to be thinking about, solutions where we're actively drawing down carbon and sequestering it. And obviously, with the great thing about biochar is you can, that it is an exothermic reaction, isn't it? It produces heat in some way, and you can use that for municipal heat in certain. Yeah. So yes, I mean that's one of the
we're looking at some of the things that we're looking at. We don't know whether we're going to be doing it actually on the ship. I'm thinking creating the biochar on a ship whilst after a harvest is not necessarily the best of ideas of a heating solution, but you do get quite a lot of engines that are in ships anyway. I mean, we're just trying to understand what that requirement is, but what's most likely is that we'll start to have to produce these modular units that sit very close to shore on a piece of land mass, so we can get it off very quickly, get it into some sort of processing, and then that's only in cold North European countries, right? If I'm somewhere like in the Philippines, I'll just put it on a greenhouse and let it dry. It's just going to be done. It's a done thing. 2-3 days.
There's very different
there are
challenges,
so many.
I know that using it as a we learned a little bit about it when we were looking at the regulation of biogas industries with using it as a feedstock, and saying actually one of the big problems in the UK is dewatering it in the first place to make it viable, so that it's not a really diluted feedstock. And as you say, like in different latitudes, it's going to give you different problems, or there'll be different challenges. But the dewatering side of it, I suppose, to make it viable. I mean, we've got like a wood burning stove in our house, and it's just become really apparent to us from the guy who put it in. He was saying, if there's any moisture in your wood, then if it's like 50% moist, then you get something like 30% of the heat from it. And if it's only got 15% moisture in it, then you get something like 80% of the heat. That's 80% of the energy from the wood comes to your house. So it kind of starts to make you think about how amazing water is at just stealing heat or transmitting heat to things. It's got really high heat capacity, hasn't it? So that's a really interesting thing. I suppose I'd kind of imagined like dewatering being something that would happen in transit maybe. But I know like the fishing industry, for example, the really highly industrialized side of international fishing, they do a lot of the processing ships, don't they, before it's even reached the shore. So that's that's really interesting. I mean, I suppose you're go on.
No, it's that feels like that's 2 or 3 iterations down the line. We, for scaling purposes, we've got to get no pun intended, we've got to get a footprint. We've got to be able to get a hold on some sort of market, and then expand that market. There's a period of time where you're building trust.
I know there's an issue around the different qualities of chars that you can get from different feedstocks as well. And I was wondering, do you know what? I mean, it's probably it's probably a question that you don't know the answer to at this point. I'm not sure, but do you know what quality of biochar you're going to get from macro, like making a macroalgae? Because I know they can be used for different things. But and obviously there's also this thing about how useful biochar is at different latitudes as well. I think regardless of where you are, it will increase the field capacity of your soil, so it will be more aerated and it will hold more water and be more drought resistant. But like the biodiversity side of things, I think they're still looking at how much of an effect it will have in different regions of the world. I think in Mediterranean soils, it's meant to be the most effective, I think. But in temperate soils, I think it's meant to be less effective. But at the same time, you're producing this substance, which is answering the question of how do we sustainably store carbon in a way that's not going to get released into the atmosphere and is not going to need to be monitored. This is the
whole point. It's just about when people I mean, as a company, right, we've got this, you've got this, I understand this, right? But when the penny drops for the general public, it's like, why was this not done before?
I know. It does really feel like that, doesn't it? Because ever since I was doing my degree, they're talking about carbon capture and injecting CO2 back into geology that we'd removed oil from, and it's like, we know how to do this, we've been doing it for decades, and we just have to join up all the technology. And it's like, but we do have to worry about who's going to monitor those stores of CO2. Is it going to be the local councils, the government, and you have to set up regulatory bodies? Is it really easy to monitor where it's all coming from? And it's like you're creating a really huge problem, aren't you, basically? And
Yes.
because the fact that it has to be monitored for as long as we are going to be alive on this planet. So it's like it's not going to react with a lot of the geology that it's going to get pumped into. It's just going to be there, ready to be released at any point in future. And it's like, how long does a government body actually exist for? I mean, I'm in the Environment Agency. It used to be the National Rivers Authority. I think it's about 20 something years old now. But if you're going to carry on those duties giving to those authorities, and are they going to want them? Or I don't know. That's another thing that's really a difficult idea.
It's really, so again, really interesting. Another thing that we're trying to do and engage with is, and this is very similar to Alexandra Cousteau's Ocean 2050, of how we're going to have this calculator of saying how much good we've done. This is how much we know noticeably we've done. You can find a statistic on how much CO2 has been pumped into our atmosphere, but it's really, really difficult finding any measurable gauge on how much has been taken out, how much good is actually being done right now, even without companies like us. Right? We're not doing anything right now, but that monitor counter, it needs to be created somehow. There needs to be some way of showing. People want to be shown. I don't think there's too many people. Just they want to show, they want to know what the roadmap looks like. They want to know exactly where we are. We're at doomsday, 2 seconds to doomsday. Okay, well, show me what we're doing to walk away from that, to turn the clock backwards, and how much good that is so things that I can understand. So when we create we get this biochar soil improver, right? On it will say you are burying this much CO2, this much carbon. This is the equivalent to X amounts of Costa coffees or whatever. And arguably, the companies that will be sponsoring us, will be saying how much of their product we've rebalanced, because that will be part of a marketing spin for us. It's all about telling the story and who's on board. And how do you do that? And it will, and I really feel that once we get that power, that momentum, it will just start growing and growing and growing and growing. It's getting to that stage, and this is what all of this is. All of this is.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's you're right. It's that having a positive narrative to be able to show people is, or just the narrative of progress, because it's quite devastating now. Like Mike Berners-Lee was talking about this, and I've heard other people say it as well. Like if an alien species was observing us from space and they could see that our CO2 production is increasing at the rate that it is, even with all we're doing at the moment and all the technological advances we've had, if you're watching from afar, it would still appear that we actually haven't even noticed what we're doing or what is happening to us, because our trajectory has remained the same, even with like all the technological advances we're making, just because what it tends to do is it's just marginally slowing the amount of increase, because we're not rolling it out fast enough, and we're still rolling out more fossil fuel industry or fossil fuel energy sectors. And it's that's one of the things that is really disheartening when you look at it wholesale, like globally. You can have these really good news stories about what the UK's done in regards to almost getting rid of all the coal in our energy infrastructure, and we can look really good, but actually our trajectory remains largely similar. We, as a country, we've reduced it a good amount, but because of our imported emissions, our offshoring has been, it's a shocking situation, isn't it? So we're still not really doing that much good, but on paper we can brand it as something that's really great.
It's all to do with leadership. There's a lot to do with leadership. I've as an observer of people, I study management, psychology, and all that sort of stuff. It fascinates me. And what's really happening here is there's been a shift, and the shift has been going on for about 15 years between old school business management, of where knowledge and power sits at the top and all decisions are disseminated down, and this more traditional, agile, transparent leadership that starts to happen in these tech companies, which may be brilliant, etc., and work. But what's happened is you've exported a lot of the thinking and the mentality that's still 20 30, 40 years old, because it's still in the workforce. Demographically, we're still in the workforce. There's all this old school thinking that's still there, and as a consequence, we are not we haven't been strong leaders in this country. We haven't seen strong leadership since really the mid 80s, when we suddenly had a big shift in who we were as we sort of invented ourselves as a service sector industry, as a service sector country in the sort of the 70s and 80s, right? And what's happened is we've been riding on that. I was saying to somebody else a little bit earlier, actually. We're a medium-sized company that's been punching above our weight for a long time, based on a lot of colonial tradition and history. And now, as we come through to be an independent country again, what is our strength? It's not in all of our leadership. We've actually had quite a lot of poor leadership, but we don't really need that. We need directive leadership that makes us feel good. That's what we've learned from the evolution of social media. We like to feel good and feel involved in something, and there's that transparency that's been massively missed.
Yeah, that is a thing that seems to be a difference between, I mean, I'll try to stick in the center really, but something that seems to be missing from the right. It tends to prey on people's fears, and the left tends to try and, it talks about making things great again, but it kind of preys on people's fears of how bad the present is, to take us back to an earlier time. And the left tries to say, let's build a better future, not thinking about and bring everyone together kind of thing. But, the left's narrative is so much more fragile, isn't it? Because it can quickly be lost, and it's not that easily rekindled. So yeah, it is the leadership side of things as well. That's one thing in the CFC that we're really trying to do, like grow as much as we can throughout the public sector, and basically grow the voice or other people's voices as well as your own. And it's something that the World Economic Forum, cites as like its top 5 things to do is join a group, join some kind of climate or climate or environmental group to grow your voice and the voice of others, and just show your organizations, show your community, show your leaders, that you want this to happen. And there's a really interesting, I listen to loads of podcasts. It's basically all I get time to do, really. Just doing chores around the house and other stuff. I don't really read much anymore. But the Green Alliance have got a really amazing one. And one of their ex-colleagues had gone and done a PhD about the feeling around climate action within government. And what she found was that it was all done anonymously, was that there's a whole host of MPs, like a really large number, basically saying that they're ready and waiting for the narrative to start to shift, because at the moment they can still easily be discredited as people who basically have left field ideas. They're green, environment over human beings, all these kind of all the bad things that are associated with being, environmentally aware or environmentally conscientious or whatever. It will very quickly, the art of the possible, the world of politics will just start saying, well, these guys are a bunch of kooks. We don't really have to listen to what they say. Let's get back to the economy and start thinking about exactly what we need to get done. And it seems like that's starting to shift now, doesn't it? And we feel like this kind of climate renaissance is happening now. People are becoming more aware.
But you wanted to distill it down to its simple facts. It's the bell curve of distribution. You can have the people on the left, people on the right, and then you've got the vast majority of those people in between. How do you have influence the people, the large majority of people in between? How do you get to that tipping point? We know that no matter what's occurred in the last 10 or 15 years, the thing that has changed is that there are more people that have joined our side, as in the side of ecology and environment, than anything else. It's not just the scientists and the ecologists talking. There are more people. The rise in veganism. The scale of
Just going to plug you in. Give me a second. If this doesn't lose connection.
Yes.
There we
Yeah,
go.
so the rise in the Friday, is it Friday for Justice, Friday for Freedom, Friday for Freedom,
Fridays for Future. Yeah.
Fridays for Future with Greta Thunberg. You know this population has increased. Absolutely. So now it's about spheres of influence. So in psychology, there's an understanding that certain people influence the influence of others. Okay, well, as a behavioral psychologist and someone interested in the understanding of people's motivations, there's no greater motivation than sheep factor, people following trends.
Yeah.
There's no greater motivation, right? It's one of the most amazing social phenomena that people are sheep. You know, they'll copy anything that they see as a trend. And so then what it is if you know that people copy other people and you know that there are people that can be influenced, how do you influence the people that are the influencers, right? Well, you give all the attention to their friends.
And then they will.
Yeah, of course. It's just basic. They don't have to. You don't have to be on my side for me to influence you. I have to influence your mate that you value more. That you value his opinion more than mine. And
Yeah.
if he says that I'm great, then you think that I'm great. It's that simple. And you haven't just affected one; you've affected two. So you talk about that in just in simple percentages, right? I only have to target 7.5 people out of 100. Done it. If those 7.5 people strategically have people that they can influence, have strategic influencers, and I can then show them that there's good being done, they come on board. You don't have to influence them directly.
So you influence the messenger as opposed to trying to influence the influencer. So 100%. Like their friend being like the right messenger. They're not coming to them with any kind of agenda like you would do.
I've done it so many times in companies that I've worked for, etc., who are having large business shifts and paradigm products, entire portfolios being shifted and organizational structures and all that, and it's the same answer every time. It feels almost obvious when you do it. You find ways of making people feel valued and good, people who've been around for a while, people who've been experienced. They don't have to be the strategic influencers at the top of the tree. They just have to be friends with those people, and good message travels. There's a phrase that someone told me called "bleached by the fabric of society," where you've been worn down so many times, you've had it, right? So that influencer is the person most likely that's been knocked down quite a few times. Doesn't mean they don't have hope in their heart. It just means that they're slightly more cynical about your approach. They've seen you or me in business 5, 6. There's been 7 or 8 iterations of me. So what makes me different from the last X amount of them? Actually, it's what I'm trying to do. It's how I approach it. That's the difference.
What have you done before you were doing this?
I used to work in strategic learning and development for businesses.
Okay.
So when large organizations just shifted, so I worked at BAT when they went from when they were starting to go from combustible cigarettes to heat not burn and vape. I worked at the Keon Group when they were going from diesel vehicles to autonomous electric powered vehicles. I worked at 3 when they were going from 4G to 5G.
Okay.
Yeah, I know nothing about any of those industries.
But it's about
but at the time we're going into them, it's about and there's a certain element, they'll throw something, those businesses will throw someone under a bus, unexpendable, but your success in that role is about how you influence and what you learn. Right? Not to say that I got everything right all the time. In fact, probably I'd say I got a lot of things wrong. But what I did get out of it from those things is all of that knowledge, and what I also got out of it was this incredible network of people. If you're in a business, right, it seems really obvious, right? If you're in a business and there's someone that comes in that affects your career in a positive way, you value that person. They've helped you. So then if that person then comes to you and say, hey, look, I know I collect, before I was in learning development, I was in sales and marketing, and you start to collect skills of understanding how people work, and you work on their their motivations. You understand the things that interest them, and arguably some of their family relationships. You take some pieces of information, and somehow this all stores at the back of my head, and I know bits and pieces. And I know when I came to with the idea of carbon capture, I knew exactly who I wanted to speak to, and who would be the right people to work with. Spoke to them straight away. I knew exactly what buttons to press. It doesn't matter to me whether I've deliberately tried to influence someone. I need to get a result of trying to do this thing with kelp, and that's what we're doing.
It's interesting. I mean, one of the things that, I work in a very science orientated organization. So, the questions of biodiversity impacts and environmental impacts come up almost immediately. But if you, in terms of like marketing yourselves, do you have those contacts to kind of fight those battles for you? Or at that point, is that something that you're not, do you feel that there's a value in that, or a necessity?
Yeah, that's massive. Yeah, so so one of our next strategic things, we've built ourselves as a brand, right? Let's not get out of our say we're bigger than we are. We've built ourselves a brand, and we've got some good ideas. The next thing we need to do is get alliances with universities. We're trying to get a link with CFAS at the moment. Trying to do some work with Swansea University. There's some potential doing some work up in Durham, Newcastle. I've got a little echo chamber up there. It's 100% has to at this at the next stage. But whilst we're right at this startup stage and we're still flexing our muscles, there's no point in. There's very little point. There's enough science enough to get to give us the information that we require. But beyond that point, no, we need much more.
There's that's interesting. So at the moment, it's the concept that you're kind of selling, and let everyone.
It's the low hanging fruit. It's the very obvious stuff.
Yeah.
I don't have to make any leaps of faith here. I just talk science. Talk the facts of science. I talk about. It was really interesting. You said earlier about how you actually communicate what the scale of the problem of climate change is, and I try to talk about it in very simple language. So I talk. They say people say to me, "Okay, so with when we had the pandemic, how comes we stopped everything? How comes the CO2 levels didn't drop? Well, CO2 stays in the atmosphere for about 36 years. Just if you think about it in terms of a bath." All we've done is we've just turned the taps off ever so slightly. There's still water coming through because we're having to live our lives and exist. But that water, even if I switched it off, that water would carry on filling because the taps are so big for 36 years. Right? So it's still going to carry on getting more and more full, even though we've had this great pause, which is the biggest human pause in history. And what we're doing is we're trying to find ways to remove the plug, to lower that amount. And you just like, it's incredible when you speak in simple terms. People really start to get it. And I maybe oversimplifying the situation, but you've got to give them a starting point.
I don't think you are. I think that's something that I failed to do since I got my degree in it. And I've always had this worry that I am not going to be factually correct. And so I forget about all the simple analogies. The only one I've ever used is like, weather is like a dog on a lead and climate is like the dog walker. As in like the dog walker's got a pretty, constant path, or a pretty predictable path, but the dog will like wander around from left to right all over the place and stop and start. But I think they're so important. They're really, really powerful tools. And I don't think, I think they're really powerful tools. I think you're exactly right for doing what you're doing with that.
And beyond that point, if they're asking me for more granular information, well, yeah, sure. But for the vast majority of those on that bell curve distribution, they're oblivious.
Yeah.
You've got to give them a start for 10.
There's one thing that I've been thinking about this a little bit more over the last few months. Again, like the Green Alliance did a really good podcast about this, but they were talking about the transition of agriculture to, transition away from agriculture really to make it like cultured food. So the stuff that's just literally grown from substrates and factories. Apparently, a few years ago, there was this idea that actually it was going to be really decentralized. There was going to be loads of entrepreneurs, and it's going to be really competitive and really innovative. And it may be innovative, but apparently what's already happened, the major food manufacturers have already cottoned onto this, and they're investing huge amounts of money and you're basically going to have oligopolies all over again, but they're not going to have to deal with any producers because they'll own the entire supply chain.
They cannibalize the supply chain.
Yeah. So that's one thing. Like with regards to, I mean, I think there'll always be a market for enriching soils because it's something that will help anything growing on land, which we're obviously going to try and do, be it forests or agriculture. But in terms of like the marketability of these different products, the chap who was being interviewed was talking about it happening by 2035. It's something, it feels like it's something worth considering, bearing in mind that, it would take us a lot longer to, use up all the biochar in terms of the soil, because there's only a certain amount of capacity in a soil, isn't there, that you can put it in to be a useful addition to a soil to make it more biodiverse and nutrient rich and all that kind of stuff. That's probably about there's too many steps ahead for you guys to be thinking about that kind of thing. There'll be a market.
But no, it's there is a okay. So let's be clear. If for what we're doing right now, we are the equivalent, of Benz. Benz when he first came out with his Mercedes-Benz car. We're not making them make very much difference at all. What we are there to get to inspire that there is a market there, and we'll use the Moore's law, the hockey curve of acceleration to expedite our growth through social media and online goodwill. And we're plugging into a particular, we're pushing a particular button specifically for the purpose of what we're trying to do. We've got a period of time where we can just about save some stuff. And if that means that we have to be a little bit influential to be able to do it, I think that's the right thing to do, because people just don't know what to do. There's that again, it comes back to that clear giving a direction. Past trees, there is nothing.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, it does very much seem that way. That's the only answer that anyone's really coming up with at a kind of political level.
And then if you go to that and you take that to the actual to the environmentalists, and you say, when was the best time to plant trees to reverse climate change? The answer is always going to be 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Because of the growth rate, just because of the slow growth rate of the tree.
Yeah, I think there is also a lag in how quickly they gather mass as well in terms of their growth. I think there is a lag in how quickly they can sequester carbon, and there's also the risk of like where you plant the species of tree, how densely you plant them, and because there's another thing with
I'm hearing anecdotal stories coming out of parts of Eastern Europe of people being rehoused to plant trees. Right? So you have been living on this land for 50 years, etc., or whatever, with your family, living fine, but because you don't own the land, right, you've been moved out of your home completely. Towns, like groups of people, moved away, no idea what they're going to do to plant the trees that me and you are buying to save the planet. How's that even right?
It's one of those difficult decisions, isn't it? This is it Paul Bloom, I think, wrote about a book about against empathy, and just saying that it's not about we need to stop empathy making our decisions, because in fact that will give us worse outcomes. And there's in the UK at the moment, I was listening to work the Environment Agency are doing with regards to how do we engage with communities on sea level rise and the risk from increased flooding from climate change. And obviously there's loads of communities that I see increasing risk, or even homes of settlements disappearing. And in the United States, the state has effectively subsidized the insurance industry to just basically say, or the housing industry, I suppose, we will pay for you guys to rebuild here. But I don't know whether it's happening in the United States yet. They're paying people to leave in certain areas, but in Canada, in some of the provinces, they are saying you've got one chance. We'll pay for you once, but it's at your own risk. If you want to rebuild, you can rebuild here. But if you want to rebuild somewhere else, we'll do that for you too. And so they're giving them a choice. But as you say, like if you're just removing people, China has done massive relocation programs for a lot of its hydroelectric projects, isn't it? Like cities full of cities the size of Plymouth have been flooded and people just moved. But again, it's like what's the best thing to do? It's like you're not just saving lives of people in the next few years. Effectively, you could be saving the lives of potentially trillions of people. If we make a really good go at this now, then
Yeah.
it could be trillions of lives, because we're not thinking about
It
today.
doesn't require too much thoughts to think, oh, hang on a minute, if there are people living on this land, surely we can do something to help them. That I think that's just
Yeah.
basic human humanity, just trying to treat people fairly. Part of our business model is, and again, when I talk about this quite openly about, we're doing this stuff on the rebalance carbon. And one of the issues that I have is if you're in sort of in the seaweed industry or aquaculture industry, you technically only got an industry for eight months of the year in the UK. How do they make money outside of the farming cycle? And what we're trying to do is, if we can encourage them to have low carbon intensive processing for their seaweed and kelp and stuff, we can get they can give us their growth data, and we can, so that's then rebalance carbon in effect. We can give them a royalty payment when we sell that data, which is
Better than
amazing.
what Google and Facebook are doing.
Yeah,
Actually monetizing the data for the
I'll give
actual
you
producing.
you give me the information on your growth rate and your species, etc., and where that farm's located. Right. Let's show you, let's make sure that it's processed in a low carbon intensive way, because obviously if it's not, then it's kind of it's against what we're trying to do. But then if we can create facilities that process in low carbon intensive ways as well and facilitate some of that, so we'll use the same tactics that the big businesses are using, but just to encourage the right behaviors at the right end of the food chain. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Just it's just it's not innovation. It's just a little tiny it's a little tiny innovation, I guess. Just trying to make sure we influence positively.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important as well, and it's something that a lot of people who are kind of a bit tech savvy are really waking up to now. In terms of, I mean, I use a browser called Brave on my phone and my home computer, and basically, none of your data will be collected by any website unless they're signed up to Brave's kind of virtual currency, and you gain virtual currency from them by browsing basically, and seeing their little adverts come from the companies that are paying into this system. So they pay Brave money to have little drop downs from their companies to advertise to you. They're pretty much all virtual currency companies at the moment. There's some others, but mostly virtual currencies. But and every time you see one of those adverts, you get a tiny fragment of virtual currency. And then anyone who does buy into this system, they don't have to be doing the advertising part of it, I don't think. But you can use your credits to go to websites of your choice to pay to pay for them, so that you can support the websites you want. And there's that idea of like your data being actually a resource that you get to use and you monetize and give to people in a way that's useful for them. And so
it's
like
so
what you're doing
important.
there, and it's like, it's like where someone said, you hear that idea of if you get something for free on the internet, it's you're the product. But I heard the idea extended. I think it was Jared Lanier was saying, or Jared Lanier saying, like, you're not the product, you're the raw material. So you're not even at that level. So you're even more basic. There's no need to worry about what quality you are or any of that. It's just about, we can refine your data in whatever way we want and package it and sell it. We don't even have to worry about you being like, I don't know. But yeah, it's a really good idea to help people's data be actually a resource that they can sell. As you say, like through the royalty idea. But there's I don't think I've got. I mean, I could talk to you about this all day, to be perfectly honest. I do find it
I'm actually gonna have to chip in a sec. I've got to do my evening job. I do a bit of care work to support my family. So it's a little bit of a look after mum and stuff, and do a few other bits and pieces. Multitude of hats you have to wear in this COVID
exactly,
world.
Yeah. Well, Howard, it's really nice to talk to you anyway. It's really great to see that this is starting to happen. And I've actually there's some stuff that I've gathered up over a while ago. Some of it might be useful to you, some of it might not be, but I'll send you a bunch of stuff that I found interesting.
That would be amazing.
There's a report as well that was about biochar, and it's what was it? It was about its potential for growth as an industry. It was like a free part of the report. I'll send it to you over anyway, and you can have a look at it.
I'd love it. It'd be great.
But yeah, thanks very much for chatting. And it sounds like you're doing a lot of the right things. I mean, I don't know what you would have to do to launch an industry like this anyway. But yeah,
giving it a go. Giving it a go.
Yeah, exactly.